The stars were always quiet, distant, and untouchable. For the Galactic Empire, the vastness of space had never felt more like a playground. Their warships, immense and gleaming, drifted between the stars like unstoppable giants. The Empire had crushed planet after planet, each civilization bending beneath their forceful rule. But even as they expanded their dominion, there was one species they had never taken seriously. Humanity. Captain Lila Grayson stood at the command console of the Prometheus, her fingers brushing over the sleek controls, eyes scanning the data streams flashing before her. She had seen it all. The destruction, the betrayals, and the quiet resolve of the human spirit. Today, however, was different. Today, she was about to make the greatest gamble humanity had ever taken. "Prepare for the transmission," Grayson said calmly, her voice steady but laced with tension. Her crew, hardened by years of skirmishes and wars, didn't flinch. They had been through hell, but this was something else entirely. The message was clear. "One final warning to the Galactic Empire, this is Captain Lila Grayson of the Prometheus. To the leaders of the Galactic Empire, humanity will not bend. We will not submit. Your actions will cost you everything. You have one chance to turn back. If you ignore this message, the consequences will be severe. Your fleets will fall in minutes. This is our warning. You will regret this." The message cut through the cold expanse of space, transmitting to the Empire's command center. Grayson leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. She could already imagine the sneers, the arrogance that would follow. The Empire hadn't taken humanity seriously in years, and now, the arrogant fools were coming to destroy them, thinking they were untouchable. At that moment, a sharp, mocking voice crackled through her communicator. It was an encrypted signal. "No doubt from the Imperial fleet, Captain Grayson, I presume? Emperor Zeroth, at your service." "How quaint. Did you really believe you could threaten us? You speak of consequences, but your people are nothing more than a passing nuisance in our galaxy. Your puny ships are no match for the might of the Empire. Your fleet will be destroyed, and you with it. Consider this your final warning. Do not make us waste time on you." The voice of Emperor Zeroth was dripping with disdain. Grayson's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. She had expected this. She had known it would happen, but it still stung. "You'll see the consequences soon enough, Zeroth. Humanity doesn't need your permission to survive. We're not your slaves, and we won't cower before you." Her voice rang out, cold and unforgiving. A moment of silence. Then, a dry laugh. "How cute. A threat from a weak species. Let's see if your arrogance matches the reality of your destruction. I'll enjoy watching you burn." The transmission ended with a sharp click. Grayson turned to her first officer, Lieutenant Jackson. "Ready the fleet. It's time." Jackson, a quiet but loyal officer, nodded solemnly. "Aye, Captain. All ships are in position." Grayson moved toward the command center's viewport, looking out into the vast void of space. Her eyes narrowed as the blip of the Empire's armada grew closer. This was it. This was humanity's last stand. For the last few years, humanity had done everything to avoid this moment. But the Empire's relentless expansion had pushed them into a corner. No more negotiating, no more treaties. The time for diplomacy had passed. Humanity wasn't strong like the other galactic powers. They didn't have the resources, the fleets, or the numbers. What they did have, however, was ingenuity. And one weapon that the Empire could never have predicted. The Prometheus was equipped with humanity's greatest secret, the Event Horizon. A quantum device capable of manipulating time and space. A weapon that could bend the very laws of physics, tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. It had never been tested in combat before. But today, it would be. Grayson's fingers hovered over the controls as she silently gave the order. Initiate the sequence. Across the fleet, her crew activated the systems. The Event Horizon hummed to life, the air around them charged with an electric tension. Grayson closed her eyes for a brief moment, steeling herself. She wasn't just fighting for her life today, she was fighting for the future of humanity. Hours passed, the Empire's fleet closing in on their final target. The time for diplomacy was long gone. The cold silence of space seemed to mock humanity's defiance, as if the stars themselves knew what was coming. The Empire's flagship, the Oblivion, loomed large in the distance, an impenetrable fortress of imperial power. Grayson's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair as her crew moved with surgical precision, preparing for the next phase. A call came in. It was the fleet's tactical officer, Commander Talos, his voice tight with urgency. "Captain, they're in firing range. We can't hold them off for much longer. The Empire has the numbers." Grayson's gaze didn't waver from the viewport. Her eyes flickered briefly to the countdown timer, the Event Horizon's energy reserves fully charged. "Hold them off," Grayson said softly. "This ends now." Her hand slammed down on the launch button, and in that instant, time itself seemed to shudder. The Event Horizon unleashed a wave of energy that pulsed outward like the ringing of a bell. In an instant, the entire Imperial fleet was frozen in place. The vast armada, once so powerful and overwhelming, was now completely immobilized. No shields, no movement, no weapons. It was as though the universe had pressed the pause button. For a fleeting moment, there was silence. The human fleet, though small in comparison, now had the upper hand. Grayson's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Attack. Now." Humanity's ships surged forward, cutting through the frozen Imperial vessels with deadly precision. The Prometheus led the charge, Grayson's tactical genius guiding her crew through the chaos, but something was wrong. The Event Horizon was doing more than just freezing time, it was distorting reality itself. Some of the Imperial ships flickered, vanishing in and out of existence, pulled into alternate dimensions, trapped between the fabric of space and time. The human fleet pushed forward, devastating the now vulnerable Empire. "But at what cost, Captain?" Talos called urgently, his voice shaking. "Something's wrong. The distortion is spreading everywhere. The fabric of time is unraveling." Grayson's eyes narrowed as the reality distortion deepened, engulfing the battlefield. The Empire's ships seemed to warp, their forms shifting like reflections in a broken mirror. "No turning back now," Grayson muttered under her breath. The weapon had worked beyond their expectations, and beyond their control. The Oblivion, the symbol of the Empire's power, suddenly appeared in front of them, flickering like a fading star. But this wasn't the Oblivion from moments ago. This was something else, something wrong. "This is your end, Captain Grayson." The voice of Emperor Zeroth boomed over the comms, distorted and warped by the time rift. "You thought you could destroy us with your little toy. You have no idea what you've unleashed." Grayson's heart raced, but her resolve never wavered. "You made your choice, Zeroth. And now, you'll suffer the consequences." The final battle had begun. The hum of the engines aboard the Prometheus filled the tense air, a constant reminder of what was about to unfold. The battle loomed ahead, the Empire's immense fleet steadily closing in on the human stronghold. It was a feeling that Grayson had come to know all too well: dread, anticipation, the cold knowing that everything would change in an instant. But this time, she wasn't just preparing for another skirmish. This was the final confrontation, and humanity's last chance at survival. "Captain," Jackson's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone tight with urgency. "They're within firing range. The Empire isn't stopping. We don't have much time." Grayson stood at the command center, her fingers steady on the sleek console. She didn't respond immediately, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The Prometheus wasn't like the Empire's behemoth warships. It was fast, nimble, and armed with humanity's greatest weapon. But the Event Horizon wasn't just any weapon, it was a gamble. A force beyond comprehension, capable of rewriting the laws of space and time. Humanity's last hope and their greatest secret. A sharp, metallic voice cut through the silence. "Captain, the weapon is primed and ready for activation. The Event Horizon is fully charged." Grayson turned to face the voice, her first officer, Lieutenant Jackson. She saw the mix of anticipation and fear in his eyes, a reflection of her own thoughts. It was a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It had never been tested before. There was no guarantee it would work. And if it didn't, humanity would be wiped out in an instant. Are we sure? Grayson's voice was quiet, but resolute. We're sure, Captain, Jackson replied, his voice unwavering. We don't have another option. Grayson nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in her chest. She glanced at the stars outside the viewport. The Empire's fleet was growing closer, their ships, massive and relentless, cutting through the darkness. The time for diplomacy, for reasoning, was over. She had warned them. They hadn't listened. Now, she would make them understand. Do it, Grayson ordered, her voice sharp. Jackson's fingers flew over the console, activating the sequence. A deep hum reverberated through the ship as the event horizon began to power up. The energy in the air shifted, thick with anticipation. The crew braced themselves, knowing the risk they were about to take. Stand by, Grayson muttered under her breath, her gaze never leaving the view ahead. The fleet was almost in position. Just a little longer. The ship's AI chimed in. All systems engaged. The event horizon is now active. We are ready. Grayson took a slow breath. Instruments calibrated. Ready, Captain. Now, she commanded. A blinding pulse erupted from the center of the Prometheus, an unnatural wave of energy radiating outward. It washed over the fleet with terrifying speed, its effect instantaneous. The Empire's armada froze. Grayson watched in stunned silence as the Empire's massive warships, each one the size of a small city, came to a complete halt. The enormous engines that once roared with power lay dormant, and the glimmer of their weapons went still. It was as if the very fabric of time itself had snapped. The fleet, once so proud and terrifying, was now immobilized. A chorus of stunned gasps rippled through the crew. This was it. This was humanity's moment. They're frozen, Jackson said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Grayson's mind raced as she processed the sight before her. The event horizon had worked. The power of the quantum device had frozen the Empire's fleet in time, rendering them helpless, vulnerable. Her fingers clenched into fists. Now's our chance. Move in. Attack. The fleet surged forward, small and agile compared to the Empire's massive ships. The Prometheus led the charge, cutting through the frozen remnants of the Empire's fleet. Humanity's ships fired with precision, tearing through the Empire's defenses, blasting through holes and sending debris into the void. The once mighty Empire was now a shattered shell of its former self. The battle had shifted in humanity's favor. They were no longer the underdogs. They were the predators, and the Empire, despite its vast numbers, was helpless against their speed and ingenuity. Grayson's voice rang through the command center. Get the comms online. I want to send a message. Jackson didn't hesitate. Aye, Captain. The comms crackled to life, and Grayson's voice filled the silence of space. This is Captain Lila Grayson of the Prometheus, she began, her words cutting through the frozen silence. To the leaders of the Galactic Empire, this is what happens when you underestimate humanity. You thought we were weak. You thought we were nothing. But today, you've learned the truth. And the truth is, we don't fight for power. We fight for survival. The message was broadcast across the battlefield, reaching every corner of the Empire's fleet. For a moment, there was only silence. The frozen ships hung in space like lifeless statues, their once great power reduced to nothing. Then, the Oblivion, the Empire's flagship, came into view. Grayson's heart skipped a beat as the enormous warship flickered, like a light struggling to stay on. Its engines were still, its weapons idle. Grayson's mind raced. The weapon had frozen the fleet, but the event horizon was unstable. It wasn't just freezing time. It was tearing at the very fabric of reality. The consequences of this weapon were far more than just the destruction of the Empire. The distortion in time was spreading. Captain Talos, the tactical officer, called out. The fabric of space is destabilizing. We're getting multiple readings from the Oblivion. It's phasing in and out of reality. Grayson's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. The Oblivion, the symbol of the Empire's power, wasn't just frozen. It was warping. Flickering between different dimensions, slipping in and out of reality like a shadow that couldn't hold its form. "Damn it," Grayson muttered. She turned to Jackson. "What's happening?" "The event horizon, it's pulling ships into different realities," Jackson said, his voice grim. "The weapon is distorting space-time beyond our control. The Empire's fleet is caught in the rift." Grayson's eyes flashed with concern. If the Oblivion was caught in the rift, that meant more than just a few damaged ships. The entire fleet could be destroyed, not by weapons or tactics, but by the very fabric of reality collapsing under the strain of the weapon. There was no way to predict how far the distortion would spread. "Can we stop it?" Grayson asked, her voice tight. Jackson shook his head. "Not without shutting down the entire system. If we reverse the polarity, it could collapse the entire sector." Grayson weighed her options. The Empire's fleet was already decimated. They had no time to waste. And yet, if they didn't act fast, the very universe could unravel around them. She clenched her fists. There was no going back. "Keep firing," she ordered, her voice cold. "We end this now." The human fleet pushed forward, their ships ripping through the wreckage of the Empire's fleet, using their speed to their advantage. They couldn't stop the distortion, but they could finish what they started. As Grayson looked out over the battlefield, she knew there was no turning back. Humanity had stepped into the fight not for power, not for conquest, but for survival. And in that fight, they had discovered something greater than just a victory. They had discovered their place in the galaxy. The Empire would never forget the power of the humans. The Empire's flagship, the Oblivion, sat motionless in space, its once vibrant hull now dimmed and frozen in time. The stars beyond, as cold and unfeeling as ever, seemed to mock the scene. Grayson stood at the helm, watching the devastation unfold. The pulse from the event horizon had rippled through the Empire's fleet, immobilizing their ships with terrifying precision. For the first time, the odds had shifted in humanity's favor. "Target their command ships." "Focus fire on the Oblivion," Grayson ordered, her voice calm yet filled with the weight of what lay ahead. Her crew responded without hesitation. The Prometheus and its fleet of smaller ships moved in, agile and deadly. Humanity's ships darted through the frozen Empire, cutting down everything in their path. The Empire's vast armada was helpless, each vessel caught in a field of suspended time, unable to retaliate. The human fleet fired relentlessly, their shots shattering the once imposing hulls of the Imperial ships. Grayson's tactical brilliance guided them every step of the way. The larger warships couldn't maneuver. Their enormous guns fired blindly, hoping to hit something, but there was no one left to hit. Their shields collapsed one after another, and the fleet that had once seemed invincible began to crumble. "Hold the line," Grayson commanded, her eyes narrowed as she observed the unfolding destruction. She was fully aware of the weapon's instability. The event horizon had stopped time, but the fabric of reality itself was beginning to fracture. The Empire's fleet was suspended, but in its place, ripples of alternate timelines and fractured dimensions began to bleed through. Each moment the weapon stayed active seemed to twist reality further. The battle was far from over. The momentary victory felt bittersweet. Grayson's gut twisted with uncertainty. Even though the Empire had been effectively neutralized, the distortions were growing. She could see ships flicker, their forms shifting, appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye. "Captain, we have to shut down the event horizon." "The rift is destabilizing," Jackson said urgently, his voice tight with concern. Grayson clenched her jaw. If the weapon's effects continued unchecked, they might tear apart not just the fleet, but entire sectors of space. "Not yet," she said, her voice firm. "We finish this now. We can't risk it." "But Captain, no," Grayson cut him off, her voice hard. "We're taking down the Oblivion and the rest of their fleet. After that, we'll figure out the rest." Jackson hesitated, glancing at the swirling chaos on the view screen. "Understood." But if we lose control, we won't lose control, Grayson said, the words leaving her mouth like a challenge. Humanity doesn't lose. Her crew pushed forward, engaging the remaining Imperial ships with renewed ferocity. The Prometheus carved through the frozen Empire's vessels with ease, using the time distortion to their advantage. Each attack landed with pinpoint precision, but as they neared the Oblivion, the distortion grew stronger. The ship flickered, its massive hull shifting in and out of existence. It was a terrifying sight, an empire built on dominance now reduced to an unstable, phasing mess. A voice crackled over the comms. It was distorted, warping and echoing as if coming from multiple places at once. You think you have one? The voice of Emperor Zeroth was twisted, broken by the distortion. This is far from over, Captain Grayson. The Oblivion will never fall. Grayson gritted her teeth. She had expected this. The Empire had always underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. But now, with their fleets frozen, the Empire was more vulnerable than ever. We'll see about that, Grayson muttered under her breath. Suddenly, the Oblivion flickered once more, but this time, it didn't return to its original position. It was gone. Grayson's eyes widened in disbelief. What the hell? Jackson said, his voice rising with confusion. Where did it go? The ship was gone. Not just from their sensors, but from existence. A gaping hole remained where the Oblivion had been. Reality itself was beginning to tear apart, like the sudden collapse of a star's core. Grayson's heart raced. Shut down the weapon now, she shouted. Now, Jackson. The command was clear. There was no more time for hesitation. The rift in space was no longer just a distortion, it was a full-scale collapse of reality itself. The event horizon was unraveling, and the human fleet was teetering on the brink of disaster. Jackson moved swiftly, his fingers dancing across the console to reverse the polarity. But it was too late. The distortions had already reached their peak, and the Prometheus was caught in the ripples of collapsing space. Grayson's head spun as reality bent and fractured before her eyes. Time loops began to twist around them. Some of the fleet flickered, disappearing, then reappearing in alternate dimensions. Their positions weren't stable. The galaxy around them had become a maze of warping timelines, each ship locked in a paradox. Captain! Jackson yelled, panic creeping into his voice. But his voice was cut off by a thunderous roar as the Prometheus lurched violently. The time distortion had swallowed them whole. For a moment, everything was silent. Grayson fought against the disorienting pull of the rift, trying to stay focused, trying to pull the Prometheus back into reality. The crew had been trained for chaos, for war, but this was something new, something they couldn't have prepared for. Status report. Grayson barked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her gut. One of the crew members, his hands trembling as he scanned the readouts, turned toward her. We've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. The distortions are spreading. We're in the middle of somewhere, Captain. We don't know where. Time is fragmented. Grayson's eyes narrowed. She couldn't let fear take hold. The Oblivion had vanished. The Empire's fleet had been shattered. The moment of victory felt more like a distant dream, fading in the chaos of time itself. Humanity had won, but at what cost? Her mind raced. The event horizon had caused more than just the downfall of the Empire, it had created a fracture in the universe. There was no undoing it now. The Empire was defeated, but the consequences of their victory were irreversible. We're not done yet, Grayson said, her voice fierce as ever. We will survive this. We will rebuild. Jackson looked up, eyes wide with fear, but there was something in Grayson's gaze that steadied him. She had always been their anchor. In the face of certain death, in the face of chaos itself, humanity would survive. We'll find our way back, Grayson promised, her voice unwavering. With the Oblivion destroyed and the Empire's fleet nothing but dust in the wind, humanity had proven its worth. But in doing so, they had unleashed something they couldn't control, an unforeseen force that would alter the course of history. Grayson gritted her teeth as the Prometheus shuddered violently, caught in the warp of fluctuating time. The crew, once confident in their victory, now felt the full weight of the chaos they had unleashed. The Empire's fleet was no longer just frozen in time, it was fragmented, split across alternate realities. Ships flickered in and out of existence, appearing in one place only to vanish a moment later. The air was thick with tension, the very fabric of space stretching and twisting, bending under the strain of the weapon's power. Status? Grayson demanded, her voice cutting through the confusion. Her hand tightened around the armrest as she steadied herself. Captain, the fleet is scattered, Jackson replied, his voice strained. We're caught in a dimensional rift. The Prometheus is shifting between timelines. We can't track the other ships. Her eyes narrowed as she looked out into the vast void. The once glorious fleet that had stood ready to crush humanity was now a fragmented mess. The Empire's warships flickered, their hulking forms distorting like reflections in a cracked mirror. Some ships were gone entirely, pulled into dimensions unknown. Others were caught in loops, frozen in a single moment, as if time itself had lost its meaning. This isn't just a tactical failure, Captain, Talos, the tactical officer, said, his voice tinged with panic. The rift is growing. We're being pulled into it. Grayson's mind raced. They had done it. They had neutralized the Empire's fleet, but in doing so, they had unwittingly torn apart the very fabric of reality. She could feel the tremors beneath her feet, the ship's systems struggling to compensate for the dimensional distortion. Can we fix this? Grayson asked, her voice low but firm. There was no time for doubt. They needed to find a way out, and fast. I don't know, Captain, Jackson said, his fingers flying over the console. The weapon was never meant for this. The power it released, it's too much. We're at the center of it. We've disrupted the timeline itself. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. They had created an irreversible fracture in reality, one that could destroy everything if they couldn't regain control. Grayson forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help them now. They had one chance to fix this. Get me the comms, she ordered. Her eyes flickered across the damaged control panel, her mind working fast. She needed to reach her crew, to ensure they were still in one piece. They had to hold it together, no matter the odds. Comms are up, Jackson reported. Grayson took a deep breath. She couldn't waste time. This is Captain Grayson, she said, her voice clear and commanding. We've been caught in a rift. Time and space are collapsing around us. The Empire is gone, but the distortion is still growing. We need to pull back, now. Regroup and get ready for emergency stabilization. That's an order. Do you understand? There was a brief silence before the reply came through. It was distorted, as if traveling through 1,000 shattered realities at once. Roger that, Captain. We're coming back in. We'll do what we can to assist. Stay with us. The crew was still out there. Humanity wasn't done yet. Grayson turned to Jackson. Recalculate our trajectory. We're getting out of this, one way or another. Jackson nodded, his fingers working furiously on the console. Captain, we've got movement from the Oblivion. It's phasing in and out, but it's still there, Grayson finished for him. It shouldn't be. That ship should have been destroyed with the rest of the fleet. Talos looked up from his station, his face pale. It's not just the Oblivion, he said. The distortions are pulling in our ships. The Prometheus is shifting, Captain. We're losing our grip on reality. Grayson's heart sank. The time rift wasn't just tearing apart the Empire, it was pulling humanity in, too. They were in the middle of a battlefield that no one could control, not even the crew of the Prometheus. We have to shut it down, Grayson said, her voice unyielding. We can't fight this if we're inside it. We reverse the polarity on the event horizon now. The crew scrambled to comply, but the closer they got to the device, the more erratic the ship became. Reality itself seemed to resist them, shifting and warping with every passing second. The Prometheus bucked under the pressure, the console flickering as the very stars outside the viewport seemed to twist, bending into impossible shapes. The Oblivion is coming back. Jackson shouted, his voice tight with urgency. It's stabilizing, but it's not alone. Grayson's eyes widened as the flagship phased into view once more, its massive hull now surrounded by an eerie aura, glowing with a strange, unnatural light. The Oblivion was no longer the symbol of the Empire, it was something else now. Something terrifying, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the ship flickered again, this time vanishing completely. The Prometheus was now caught in its own time loop, trapped in the intersection of countless dimensions. Captain, Talos yelled. We're losing control. The event horizon isn't just stopping time, it's creating more of these rifts. The longer it's active, the more powerful they become. If we don't shut it down, I know, Talos. Grayson snapped, cutting him off. We have to stabilize now. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the command panel. The pressure was suffocating. The Prometheus was no longer fighting to survive. It was fighting to exist. Grayson's mind raced as she searched for any option, any way out of the nightmare she had unleashed. Suddenly, the ship's systems flickered again. The rift intensified. She could feel the distortion in the air, like the pull of an invisible force. The laws of time and space had been broken beyond repair. There was no going back. This is it, Grayson, Jackson said softly. If we don't get this under control, we'll be lost forever. Grayson's jaw clenched. The Oblivion was gone for good, but the damage it had caused had set in motion a chain reaction they couldn't stop. They were trapped in a collapsing universe, and the only way out was to stop the weapon that had torn everything apart. Do it, she ordered. Shut it down. Jackson nodded, sweat dripping down his face. His fingers flew over the controls, trying to reverse the catastrophic effects of the event horizon. But reality seemed to slip further from their grasp with every passing second. Time was no longer linear. The Prometheus was phasing in and out of different timelines, lost between moments. As the distortion reached its peak, Grayson realized that the crew had already made a choice. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for the future. Humanity's will to endure was stronger than the rift itself. They had lost everything, but they would never stop fighting. Grayson stood frozen, her eyes locked on the distorted view outside the Prometheus's viewport. The very fabric of space was unrecognizable. Reality itself was tearing apart at the seams. Their victory over the Empire felt hollow as the crew now found themselves caught in the middle of the chaos they had unleashed. The event horizon had shifted time and space so drastically that the universe seemed to be rebelling against their presence. We can't survive in this state for much longer. Jackson's voice was taut with fear, his face pale as he stared at the monitors. The rift's collapsing everything around us. Grayson's mind raced. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. They were supposed to have won, to have proven humanity's power. Now, they were paying the price for underestimating the weapon they had unleashed. It wasn't just the Empire that had suffered, it was the universe itself. The time loops, the distortions, they were growing, threatening to consume everything, but Grayson's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let humanity be the cause of its own undoing. They'd already given everything to win. And now, they had to fight to keep it. Captain, Talos called from his station. We've got a fresh anomaly. The Oblivion, it's reappeared, but it's not the same. It's been altered. Grayson felt her heart skip a beat. The Oblivion had vanished. Or so they thought. Now it had returned, but something was wrong. The entire ship was pulsing with strange energy, its massive form flickering between different dimensions. It was as if the ship itself was a living paradox, existing in multiple timelines at once. Can we communicate with them? Grayson asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing within her. No signal, Talos responded. The ship's communications are scrambled. But it's definitely out there, floating in the center of the rift. The rift. The very thing that had been humanity's undoing. The event horizon had created a hole in time and space, but now, the Oblivion was at its center. It was absorbing the chaos, feeding on the destruction they had caused. But why? What was it doing? Grayson narrowed her eyes. She knew she didn't have the luxury of waiting for answers. They had to act. Fast. Jackson, plot a course to the oblivion, she ordered, her tone decisive. We're taking it down, once and for all. Are you sure, Captain? Jackson's voice was filled with doubt. That ship could be the key to ending this. If we can just figure out what it's doing, we don't have time for theories, Grayson snapped, her patience wearing thin. We end this now. Set course. Jackson hesitated, then nodded grimly and input the coordinates. The Prometheus lurched forward, its engines screaming in protest as it fought against the distorted fabric of space around them. They were moving toward the oblivion, the heart of the rift, where the greatest risk and greatest opportunity lay. As they approached the oblivion, the ship's power continued to fluctuate, the massive warship phasing in and out of reality like some dark omen. The crew could feel the pull of the distortion, like an invisible hand reaching out to tear them apart. Every movement in space, every adjustment of the ship, felt like they were being drawn into a void. Get ready, Grayson muttered under her breath. This is the moment. The Prometheus was now dangerously close to the oblivion. The distortion was too powerful to ignore. Grayson knew that if they didn't act quickly, they would be lost in the rift forever. We're in range, Jackson announced, his voice strained. Captain, we can fire at will. But I don't know how much more the ship can take. Grayson's gaze never left the viewport. The oblivion was there, its shadow looming large against the swirling chaos. It was a symbol of the Empire's arrogance, their unrelenting drive for dominance. Now, it was the last obstacle between humanity and the end of this nightmare. Fire, Grayson commanded, her voice unwavering. The Prometheus's weapons fired in rapid succession, each blast a calculated strike at the heart of the oblivion. The Empire's flagship, once a fortress of invincibility, now flinched under the assault. The distortion around it seemed to pulse with every impact, like the ship itself was trying to fight against the very laws of reality. But then, something unexpected happened. The oblivion's form flickered violently, and instead of collapsing, it began to pull itself together, growing stronger in response to the Prometheus's attacks. The ship was adapting, feeding off the rift, growing more powerful with each passing second. Captain, Talos shouted. It's absorbing the energy. Every shot we fire is strengthening it. Grayson's blood ran cold. The oblivion wasn't just a symbol of the Empire's power, it was a conduit, a bridge between the fragmented realities. The more they attacked, the more they fed it. They had to stop. Jackson, disengage the weapons. Grayson shouted. Now. The weapons on the Prometheus went silent, but the damage had already been done. The oblivion was now pulsing with energy, its form blurring as it phased in and out of existence. The rift was growing more unstable by the second. We're losing control, Jackson said, panic rising in his voice. Captain, we can't keep this up. If we don't find a way to stabilize the rift, I know. Grayson snapped, her mind racing. There was no easy answer. They had to end this now, before the rift consumed them all. But how? And then, it clicked. The event horizon. The rift was the result of the weapon's power. If the oblivion was feeding on the distortion, then perhaps they could reverse it. Use the weapon against itself, Talos, activate the event horizon, Grayson ordered. We're using it one last time. Reverse the polarity and collapse the rift. If we don't, we're all dead. Talos hesitated. But, Captain, if we do that, we risk destabilizing everything. The rift could collapse us. We don't have a choice, Grayson said, her voice resolute. Do it. Talos activated the weapon. The air around them pulsed with energy, the ship's systems groaning under the pressure. The Prometheus was fighting to stay stable as the rift continued to collapse, and the energy from the event horizon surged through them all, and then, just as the oblivion was on the verge of pulling everything into the void, the rift imploded. Time and space folded in on themselves, the distortion collapsing in a massive shockwave. The oblivion's form flickered one final time, and then, it was gone. Grayson didn't allow herself to breathe a sigh of relief just yet. They had won, yes, but at what cost? The Prometheus shook violently as the last remnants of the rift faded away, leaving only the silent vacuum of space behind. "We did it," Jackson whispered, his voice a mix of disbelief and awe. Grayson nodded, her face set in determination. "We survived. But the cost was clear. The universe had been shattered by their actions. The Empire was gone. The rift had been closed. Humanity had proven itself. But the price of that victory was still unknown." Grayson turned to her crew, the same fierce determination in her eyes. "We're not done. Humanity will rebuild. We're the ones who decided to fight back. And we'll keep fighting, no matter what." The Prometheus drifted in the aftermath, battered and scarred, but still alive. Humanity had proven that it could survive anything, even time itself.